Hi, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Hi, Zuby. How are you doing?
Yeah, all good. Thanks, Courtney. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you so much for your patience today.
That's
Had
okay.
a rough start for my morning. It's your evening. So, yeah, it's pretty awesome that we can do this like across the world.
Yeah, it's magical.
Yeah, totally. So I've been following you, and I find it so fascinating that, well, there's a lot of different overlaps, that we have a lot of mutual interests that, but I find it so fascinating that you're in England, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here I live in Santa Monica, California. I'm currently in Vegas right now. So we're in totally different parts of the world, and I feel like we're experiencing some of the very similar things going on culturally, politically, in the world right now. And You've expressed some frustrations with what's going on currently that I definitely resonate with. And I think that's really interesting, right? That it has permeated so far. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on what some of the similarities you've seen are, and from where you are, where I am, and throughout the world, throughout the West, and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Well, it depends on what aspect we're talking about.
Sure.
I mean, obviously, the 2020 has been totally dominated by the whole COVID-19 coronavirus situation. That's kind of been the talking point, that you can't really speak to anybody this whole year, it seems, without that coming up in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't matter where in the world they are. They could be in Europe, Africa, Asia, the Americas, Australia, wherever. It's all COVID, just whether it's the virus itself or everything around it, because I think not only has that been happening, but also it's prevented so many other things from happening. So all the stuff that people would normally talk about and the things people would usually be doing, they haven't sort of been able to do those things because there have been all these restrictions and lockdowns and limitations and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been very frustrating and tiring. I don't think that a lot of the measures have made sense. I don't think that a lot of countries have handled it very well. I think a lot of politicians have been extremely hypocritical and just very knee-jerk and reactionary and just doing things that, I think a lot of stuff this year is about, I think a lot of it's been about making people feel good and making people feel safe more than it's about keeping people safe. I think a lot of it very quickly became very highly politicized, and there have been lots of massive governmental overreach, massive limitations on people's basic civil liberties and freedoms, all sold under the guise of this is something that's extremely temporary, to the tune of 2 weeks is what they were generally talking about before. And yet here we are now in December, and, some countries are going back into lockdown. The UK has just come out of a second lockdown, despite the first one not working, so I think the definition of insanity, according to Einstein, was, constantly, repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. It's been extremely myopic. People have this tunnel vision around COVID. They've forgotten all the other things that people die of. They've forgotten all of the impacts of the lockdowns and the restrictions that these have on the economy and people's mental health and people's physical health and all these other things. And it's just been like, this huge madness of crowds that I've been seeing, and a lot of media and political posturing, and the whole thing's been fascinating. It's been really interesting. I mean, I never used to understand the 20th century until this year. Now I can totally understand how everything that happened in the 20th century happened, even though that's very dark. But with all that, yeah, go ahead.
Go on, continue.
Yeah, but with all that said, I mean, for me personally, for my business, for my career, it's been an excellent year. I've had the best business year I've ever had. despite all of that, and despite not even being able to do any live performances or public speaking or anything like that, still totally crushed it this year. So for me personally, it's been like, it's had its ups and downs this year, but I think for just people on a collective level, nationally, internationally, it's been a testing year, and I think a lot of it could have been avoided. Obviously, a virus is going to do what it's going to do, which is sad, but the way that you want to respond to things, but I think there's been a big overreaction on a lot of levels, and I think overreaction can be just as, if not more dangerous than underreaction. People have been acting like it's just a binary choice between stopping the entire world from working and stopping stopping people from working and stopping people from having any basic freedoms or the ability to do just anything normal or even show their face in public. People are acting like it's a binary split between that or just letting the virus run through and kill everybody who it's going to kill. And it's like, no, there are other options here.
Absolutely. You brought up a really interesting point, how this helped you to understand the 20th century. I have been seeing a lot of parallels. That's been really fascinating. I spent a lot of time studying the 20th century, actually. So this really is very illuminating to me because people think that could never possibly happen again. So I'm really curious, how has this shed light on that for you?
Look, just to human psychology. Human collective psychology, understanding the power of fear, the power of propaganda, the power of manipulation, social conformity, all of these, cognitive dissonance, doublethink, hypocrisy, every sort of human psychological trait, both on an individual and a collective level, has been fully on display all year. Right, all year, whether you're talking about, laws and rules that don't make sense, or people being afraid to speak out against the narrative because they don't want to be called names, they don't want to be called anti-vaxxers or conspiracy theorists, or being told that they want people to die, and so they, just do this. A lot of people wearing masks. Most people wear masks because of social pressure, rather than anything particularly scientific or medical, right? Like if you go into a room with 100 people who are not wearing masks, then you don't feel any compulsion to put on a mask. If there's 100 people in a room all wearing masks and you walk in and you don't have a mask on, you naturally, as a human being, we are still herd animals to some degree, you feel a social pressure that, oh gosh, I need to put this mask on. And, maybe someone will shame me or attack me even. And we've seen videos going around of people getting, attacked or chastised in airports or in supermarkets or whatever because they're not wearing a mask, or maybe the mask isn't covering their nose or whatever. So it's become this sort of like very polarizing political symbol almost of where you stand. If you don't wear a mask, somehow you don't care about humanity, or you're anti-science, or you probably think the earth is flat, and you probably think that COVID is caused by 5G and all this stuff. Like, people are just this binary thinking, and just the power of fear. Once it's funny, I said in a tweet last year that a lot of people say that they value freedom over safety and security, but that's a lie. And a lot of people disagreed with me when I wrote it. And this year has just been absolute evidence that I'm totally correct. Absolute evidence of correct. People asking the government for permission to leave their houses. Like, what is that? People asking the government for permission to celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas with their parents. People are not doing Christmas because the government told them not to. Like, what? I mean,
crazy. Did you ever get to this point?
Well, yeah, because I've studied history. It's happened before, right? So it's happened before that, but that's what I'm saying. It's like, you can see how, people look back at things and they're like, man, how did communism happen? How was Stalin able to do that? How was Mao able to do that? How did Hitler do that? How was the Holocaust possible? If I was there, I would have protected the Jews. Or it's like, most people wouldn't have done jack. Just like, someone who's sitting, someone who's terrified of this virus, when maybe in their age cohort it has a 99.9% survival rate, and they're driving around in a car with a mask on and virtue signaling about. It's like, you would not have done anything. You would have just gone along with the crowd. Like, most people would not have done anything, especially if there's like a genuine, and in that case, the sort of power of fear would have been a lot greater. right? It would have been a lot greater because your life would have been much more genuinely at risk had you, taken the correct moral stand in these situations. So, and also, other factors like the whole thing of like people policing one another, right? So if I go on social media right now and I say, oh, I just went to the supermarket, but I didn't wear a mask, right?
Right.
I will get like dragged halfway across the internet for writing that, right? If I do it, if I just do that action and nobody knows about it, no one cares. Even in the supermarket, nobody cares. But if I were to say, oh, or hey, I just had some friends round for dinner, people will be like, you're violating the guidelines. How many friends was it? What tier are you in? Like all this. And it's like people policing each other, just like that is what happened under communism. That's what happened under Nazism, etc. The people policed each other, right? You had these secret police, the Cheka, the Stasi, etc. And what was the one in Romania? The Securitate. And, people acting as informers, the Western countries setting up hotlines where you can snitch on your neighbor. Maybe they're having a party or something. They're having a dinner party, and I can call up a number and report to the police that my neighbor is having 8 people over for dinner. Like, what is this? And this has all happened so quickly. So quickly. I was in London the other day. There's signs all around the train station saying, you must wear a mask, £6,400 fine, maximum penalty. I'm like, okay, so if I show my face in public, I can be fined £6,400. What's that? Like $9,000 for showing my face in public and breathing fresh, clean air.
Right.
Even if I'm not near anybody.
Right.
Even if I'm not near anybody, like, they're saying, socially distance, wear a mask. It's like, well, if I'm socially distancing, I don't need to wear a mask. Like, y'all keep screaming science at me. And so, firstly,
follow the science.
Yeah. They're acting like everyone, and it's psychologically, it's so damaging, right? People have been trained to see every other human being as like a virus factory that's potentially going to kill them. That is awful, right? People not seeing each other's faces, not being able to see a smile, not being able to hang out with your friends, with your family for months and months and months on end. Like, I think the psychological, economic, deaths from other sources, all of that, I think the measures taken to control the virus are ultimately going, I don't know how you weigh this up, but I think they're going to be more destructive than the virus. And I'd argue in many places, not in every country maybe, but in many countries, I'd argue that's already happened. And I think in the next decade, that's going to become more clear. That's what I think.
I absolutely agree with you. That's one that without a doubt, it's one of the things
I didn't even mean to rant like that, but
no.
It was so tiring. Like,
it was very well said.
Thank you.
Very well said. Very articulate. One of the things that President Trump kept saying is, we can't have the cure be worse than, the virus. Like,
yes.
And I think that is something people really need to take very seriously.
Yeah, it's a bit late for that now, but I said it's a bit late, but I can at least say I've been
I know.
Yeah, I can at least take comfort in the fact I've been consistent since February or March on this.
I have too, and you brought up people calling people conspiracy theorists. I went on lots of rants back in February, March. People called me absolutely crazy.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a conspiracy theorist. And I said, well, that's a really great way to shut down a conversation.
Exactly. It's people trying to police each other. That people think that they can just call you a conspiracy theorist or an anti-vaxxer or anti-science, and that's just supposed to shut you up.
Yep.
Right. Just like people
or racist. That's
I was going to say, just like people have been using it. Oh, you're racist, you're homophobic, you're transphobic, you're sexist, you're a misogynist, whatever, like with no grounding, right? People just use these terms often nowadays to try to shut down a conversation or to shut down a debate or to, it's such a dishonest tactic. And, and the sad thing is it works on a lot of people. Fortunately, I'm not someone who cares that much about, as much as I like being liked and, as popular as I'm becoming, I don't really care that much about social approval. Like, that's just how I'm wired. Like, I don't particularly care if people think like, I don't care about going along with the herd. I don't go along with the herd if I think they're running off a cliff, right? Even if they come on, run off this cliff with it. I'm like, no, I'm not. No.
It's really interesting because in the, I actually spent a lot of time kind of In recent years, I was much more silent about my views because out of, a desire to be liked, out of a fear of being canceled. And when the lockdown started and I saw what was really going down and I saw people policing each other. And for me, what it was is that I felt part of the reason that we're seeing this pervasive, draconian measures is because people like me didn't speak up. It wasn't just because of the cancel culture or because of the silencing of opinions and speech. It was because the good people didn't do anything to stop it. And
that's the story of history, isn't it?
Yes. And
that's the story of history right there. It just takes, good people to stay silent, right?
Absolutely. And so I felt the need to be out of a matter of integrity, personal integrity, to start to speak up because I didn't, regardless if anybody, cared or heard or agreed, because it felt that for my own authenticity and my own integrity, I couldn't just continue to be silent if it would be hypocritical. And one of the things was that people started to call me all these names. And in the beginning, I'm human, my feelings were hurt. People I thought were my real friends were calling me terrible things. And I got to the point where I said, you know what, I really don't care because then you don't know me. I know who I am as a person. I know what my values are. And that's enough for me. And if you're going to call me these names just to shut down the conversation, you're not really interested in having an actual conversation.
A lot of people are not. That's how they get you. That's how these things happen, right? Like once people look with almost any major issue, there's a safe position to have. Right. With almost every issue. Look, I'm not even talking about stuff that's like where we should all have the same opinion, right? Like there's certain things where like, okay, obviously we should all agree that, nobody should murder or rape or steal people. Like,
one would hope. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not going to be super edgy by coming out in favor of murder or anything. Right. But like when it comes to a lot of issues where there's a lot of gray area or where there really are different sides, with virtually all of them, there's the position, there's a mainstream position that people consider makes them a good person, right? And we've very much seen that. So when it comes to, this whole coronavirus situation, like if you're not terrified of it, if you're not like at least like very scared and concerned, you're like supposed to be a bad person, like you're a bad person, especially if you don't support mask mandates or you don't support even now, the so-called conspiracy theorists have been saying a long time that they're going to push for mandatory vaccinations and were dismissed. And now literally those conversations are happening, right? And the good person position is the person who wears their mask. Maybe they even wear it in their social media profile photo, and every picture they take, they're wearing their mask and they're talking about how scared they are, and they're peddling the fear narrative, right? And that's the safe position. On virtually every issue, there's a safe mainstream position that, if you want to know what these safe positions are, just listen to like any Hollywood actor's position on anything. Like they'll always give, they're never going to give the controversial opinion. And if they do, then they'll get dragged halfway across the earth for it. There's always just the safe opinion and the other ones get silenced. And those positions can be half the population or even more, right? So, the safe position is to say, okay, even this year, like I'm not in America, but the safe position is to say that, you oppose Donald Trump, right? That's the safe position, right? Of course, if you're a good person, you oppose Donald Trump. It's the same in the UK. People in the UK, most people are anti-Trump or whatever, or at least they think they are because they think it makes them a good person. They're like, oh, well, the media told me that Orange Man bad, so Orange Man bad, I hope Joe Biden wins. They don't know anything about Biden. They don't know anything about Kamala Harris. They don't, they've just adopted the safe position. Because coming out outright, especially if you're a public figure, if you're a celebrity and you come out and you say, I'm a Republican, I'm voting for Trump. Danger, right? Dangerous. That's why people don't do it. That's why he always, there's always the underpoll. There's from 2016 to this most recent election, like you'd think if you just watch mainstream media and you just follow mainstream people, you'd think that there is no way on earth that Trump could like even compete because, there's that thing of, well, it looks like everyone is voting for Democrat, everyone's voting for Biden, but there's all these Trump's dozens of millions of them all over the country, all over the world, and who agree with that, but they're just like, oh, but it's too, I was in the States last year for 3 months and I saw one MAGA hat the whole time I was there. And I was like, yo, why aren't you guys, and why isn't anyone wearing them in real life? And everyone's like, oh, I don't want to be attacked. I don't want to be attacked. I can't be, I wore one once and someone pulled, and I'm just like,
life.
Yeah, exactly. And you're just like, oh, okay. That's interesting, right? But, you could wear a Bernie Sanders t-shirt. You could wear a Hillary Clinton merchandise, whatever that is or whatever. So it's just interesting how on every single issue, from this virus to political stuff to, social issues, whatever, there's just always there's always a safe mainstream narrative and position. And, and oftentimes the people who adopt it are the ones who think that they're sort of some kind of like radical or fighting the system or whatever. And it's like, look, if every corporation, every celebrity, every tech giant, every most mainstream news channels, whatever, if they all agree with you, then you are not the resistance. Like
you're not the resistance at all. Not the resistance. You're not an original thinker.
No. And if those are your views and you've genuinely thought about them, then that's fine. But if you've just adopted them because
don't think that you're being so counterculture.
No.
You're literally crowding the mainstream narrative.
Exactly. And if, like I said, if you've studied it and those are your positions you've reached independently, 100% fine. But if it's just because you're afraid to voice your real opinion, or you think that voicing your real opinion people would call you names or whatever, then you're just being a coward. That's all it is.
And I would say they do dangle the Hollywood elites and the political figures. They dangle this carrot of unearned moral superiority.
Oh yes, yeah. Like I've been the bad guy all year by not like saying that. I look and I'm not even in the camp of like, oh, COVID is nothing at all. Like I know, like I have 3 people in my family who there's 3 doctors in my family. Right. So my dad, my brother's wife, like they've all seen, people die of COVID. Like they've been dealing with this thing. They've been seeing it and dealing it with firsthand all year. So I'm not speaking from some position of like, oh, I know of, not personally all know, but I know of 4 people who have died from COVID. Right. Or at least with COVID. Let me be more precise because I don't know which one it is. But so I'm not even in this camp of like, oh, this thing is like, it's nothing.
Distinction though of dying with COVID.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a balance between like recognizing that and also being able to maintain the position. Like, I don't think the government should be forcing vaccines into people. I don't think the government should be forcing people to wear masks in situations where it absolutely doesn't make sense. I don't think that these rules make sense. I think that we're massively overreacting. I think that we're forgetting the wider picture. I think the devastation being done to the economy is going to potentially kill more people than the virus is killing. I think that what's happening with children who are going to schools and doing this and doing that, I think all of these things are massive problems which are not being addressed in an effective manner. So like 2 things can be true at once. Right? COVID can be something that's potentially dangerous especially to certain segments of the population. Sure. That can be true. And it can also be true that we've massively overreacted and that lots of these government policies don't make sense and are ineffective and could actually be more harmful. Like those 2 things can be true. It's not one or the other, right? And people just have this like really binary way of looking at it. And if you say like, if you even tell people the survivability rate, you say, it's like for a lot of populations, it's literally over 99.9%. I think if you're under 40, it's literally over 99.9%. And if you tell people that, they get angry. Yeah. And I'm like, what do you like? That's a good thing. It's good that
be happy about that, right?
Yeah, it's good that children and teenagers and young adults are not dropping dead in the street. Like has happened in the past with
celebrate, right?
Yeah, you think that would be a good thing, but they're like, no, they want their narrative. They want the doomsday narrative. They want like, they want to focus on the deaths. They want to focus on the cases. They want to and we've never done this before for anything else.
No.
Anything else. Like imagine if we clocked like, deaths from heart disease or flu or pneumonia or traffic accidents or anything like on the same thing with this running tally. And we're like, okay, today, this many people caught the flu. This many people died of the flu. Like we'd all just be sitting in our houses, like rocking, like terrified all the time because, we've been surrounded by viruses our whole lives. We've been surrounded by danger our whole lives. Like every time you do anything, every time you leave the house.
Woodstock during the Hong Kong flu.
Yeah, there's always been these risks.
Social distancing or wearing masks, I promise you.
Yeah, there have always been these risks, and it's like we every single day as adults, we make risk assessments, right? We make risk assessments, and we even on a very personal level, right? If you don't know how to swim, you probably shouldn't go surfing. Like, you don't need a law telling you can't surf if you can't swim.
Right.
Like, human beings are intelligent. Like, well, I say human beings are intelligent. Maybe, but like,
that lately.
yeah,
that might be arguable.
Yeah, we generally don't need laws to check our own survival. Like,
Right.
most of us are not trying to die. Like, we're not going out there like.
But one would hope, right?
Yeah, like it's pretty rare, like, for someone to be like, we care about self-preservation. Yeah. So when it comes to something to do with self-preservation, you don't generally need like super draconian laws saying like you can't leave your house because it's dangerous outside, which is literally what's happening, right? You can't go outside because it's dangerous. Right? Even if you live in like some crazy city where there's like gang violence and there's like shootouts and like all that, you can still leave your house. The government doesn't say you can't. The government doesn't say, oh, you can't leave your house. It's like, no, you can leave. Like, but you're taking a risk. You're taking a risk going in certain areas or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I'm rambling again.
No, you're not at all. Like, you're absolutely not. People need to hear this, because I think people have really. Was it Ben Franklin who said that, if you are willing to sacrifice your liberties for safety, then you don't deserve your liberties. I butchered the quote. It was for safety.
Yeah,
but
I know what you mean. Yeah, those who are willing to sacrifice freedom for safety deserve neither, or something along those lines.
I'm gonna have to look up that quote.
Yeah, it's something along those lines. Yeah,
but I think that's absolutely true, and that's really what we're seeing, is that people are sacrificing their freedom for this. And it's not even for safety; it's for this mirage of safety. That's really what it is.
Exactly. It's about making people, and it's about and with the government policies and stuff, a lot of it is just about doing something, right? Like, everyone feels that you have to do something, right? Like, sometimes doing nothing is the right answer. There are situations where like actually do nothing is the right move, right? I'm not saying in this like totally literally do nothing and let the virus run through, right? But not like doing this knee jerk thing, like every time cases rise past a certain number, and obviously the more tests you do, the more cases you get, like all of these things, and just like, okay, we're gonna close the restaurants again. You're like, what? Yeah, we're closing the gyms. It's like, that's a stupid knee jerk reactionary response, and you're not.
Last time. Why are we doing that again?
Yeah, this is what I mean. If it worked the first time,
think about that. Yeah.
If it worked the first time, you won't need a second one. If it doesn't work the first time, why are you doing it a second time? Right? Like, pretty basic logical thinking. But I don't know. Like, I'm just amazed that for this long, I'm just amazed that we're 10 months, like we're a year into this, and it's still like. I mean, remember, 15 days to slow the spread, flatten the curve, all that good stuff. Just 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Look, most people are cool to, for the greater good. Like, if the messaging makes sense, most people are okay to, okay, I don't like this, but I'm happy to take like super precautions for 2 weeks. Make sure the hospitals don't get overwhelmed. Make sure you guys get your PPE. Make sure you get enough ventilators. That's how we were sold this thing. Like, people cannot forget. That's how we were sold it. We were sold 2 weeks. Okay, cool. That makes sense. I understand the logic. Makes sense. Now, they're trying to restrict gatherings for Christmas. They're trying to restrict. I'm like, look, guys. I mean, I've been libertarian for years, more libertarian leaning for years. But I'm like, look, if this year has not made somebody more libertarian, then they might actually just be stupid. Like, I don't know how after this year someone's idea is we need more governmental interference and control and power. Like, I don't. If that's your solution after this, then Lord help you.
I kind of.
If you think that's the answer, then I don't know what to do now.
We've seen throughout history the way that most problems are solved is through free thinking people. It's not through the government sanctions. It's not through limiting freedom of speech. It's not through limiting freedom of action. It's by free critical thinking individuals having the ability to be creative and to, for ingenuity to occur.
Yeah.
And have you seen any trends? in people moving more towards that direction. Not necessarily the governments, but
Oh gosh, no.
individuals, like
Um,
waking up and saying, wait, maybe I do need to have my own thought
yeah.
processes and maybe, adjudicate risk for myself.
I don't know, like maybe a little. I feel like the people who are already there are like feel very sort of validated and are like, see, I told y'all. But those who weren't, maybe I'm sure some people have been red pilled by it all, but a lot of people aren't. Like cognitive dissonance is an incredible thing. Like once someone has and this goes for everything. Like nobody is immune to this, right? Once you have a strong belief in something, or you are sold on a particular narrative, it is extremely difficult and painful to, get out of it. For a whole bunch of reasons, and the longer you've had that belief, the harder it is to get out of it.
That people don't want to learn the truth because they don't want.
No. And look, I mean, the human brain is a fascinating thing. Like I'm not sure how much people care about the truth. I think more people care about like feeling good and appearing good than they care about the truth. To be honest with you, I think the majority of people care more about feeling good and looking good than they care about doing good, or they care about what's actually factually correct. And like I said, a lot of people's beliefs, and this goes for, a lot of people's beliefs, and no one is immune to this. A lot of what people believe is based on what they think will make them appear a good person. That's just what it is. Or just taking the social cues, or just outsourcing the thinking, right? Just the assumption, okay, well, most people believe that, so they've probably already done the work, and I don't really need to think about that. I will just adopt the popular opinion. And then the popular opinion might change, and that same person just, flip-flops, and they're like, okay, this is now the popular opinion. I'm adopting that. And that's just kind of how human beings are. And like I said, it's certainly been fascinating. It's been frustrating in many ways as well, but I don't know. It's I know who I'd go to war with, and I know who to socially distance from in the future.
That's a big lesson for you.
Yeah.
You said that business has been great for you in this year.
Oh, I've killed it this year.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about like how and why?
Yeah, well, I mean, so initially I was primarily known as a musician for sure, so I haven't been able to do any live performances or gigs or anything like that. But I'm also an author. My fitness book has sold very, very well this year. Strong Advice, Zuby's Guide to Fitness for Everybody. That's been selling well. My podcast has been progressing and doing well. I do coaching. I onboarded 12 new clients last week. So I've got, business is actually booming for me. There's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of opportunities. I've recently written my new album. I'm going to be recording that in January. So next year I've got new music, lots of new coaching clients, a new podcast. So for me, like it's been, and I can work online anyway. Like I've been making money online before all this. I'm not someone who was going into an office to make their money, or, I've been self-employed for the past 9 years. So I was already well positioned for all this stuff.
Sure.
And to be honest, like I'm kind of like at the stage where, I kind of feel bad for people who are not, like I said, beyond the people who are like directly impacted by the virus itself.
Yeah.
My heart goes out to people who have brick and mortar businesses and haven't been able to open the doors, or who run restaurants, who run gyms, who run barbershops and hair salons and all that stuff where, the government's just like, no, you can't run your business. And I don't know, I think over 100,000 businesses in the USA have permanently shut, I believe. Dozens of millions of people unemployed, like all that. And the UK is going to have some of that pain. We've just managed to delay it over here because the government's been, floating people magic money. But, it's all going to come to a head. It's all going to come to a head in the next couple of years. And I do think that if people have any sense, they will look back on this and be like, whoa, we sort of walked a bit blind into that one and let our emotions take over our sort of mental and logical and rational faculties on a collective level, because I feel like that's been going on. I feel like that's been going on a lot. And a lot of bad actors have been using this as an opportunity to seize power and kind of do what they want. And talking to you mayors and governors and presidents and politicians and et cetera who flout their own who tell us one thing and then go flout their own rules. Media pundits too. Everybody, anyone who's doing that.
Yeah, the hypocrisy is rampant.
And
that should be, if nothing else, that should be eye-opening for people. It should be maddening for people as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really being sold in this line of fear, then why is it okay for, it's not okay for one group of people, but it's okay for others. And that just doesn't make any sense at all. And it's really...
Well, it makes perfect sense politically, but... it makes perfect sense if you know how.
Dramatic about how I
yeah. I'll be un-PC for you. Like all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. George Orwell.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like that's what it is. They're just showing it. It's just in our faces. It's just like okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would, to be respectful of your time, I don't know that I want to dive down this rabbit hole, but if you're willing to come back on again, I'd love to discuss your book because. I think there's a lot of people. So a lot of my podcasts that I've done, who are on all different kinds of topics, but people think it's really strange that I cover and sometimes in the same discussion, health and fitness and politics.
Yeah.
How are these two intertwined? But I actually think that there's a huge overlap. Certainly with the COVID, we see even more overlap. But I think that, even just in terms of culturally, and mindset, there's a lot of overlap. And maybe without going, we can, if you're willing to, we could do a whole nother discussion on your book alone. But if you would want to touch a little bit on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So what's that? The link between sort of health and politics?
And culture and politics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, as Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture, which is very true. I think it's very true. I think I have a line somewhat reflecting that on my next album. So, I consider myself much more like a social cultural commentator than I consider myself like a political commentator. Sure. I'm not that interested in all the deep nitty-gritty of politics, but I'm very interested in human psychology and society and culture and religion and morality and how these things sort of shape the world and the way we interact with each other and everything like that. So, I think there are always certain patterns. Everybody's an individual for sure, but you can see patterns between how people think on one thing and how probable they are to think on another thing. So take an example, right? Like if someone tells me if someone tells me they wear a mask everywhere and they support the mask mandate, or someone tells me that they only wear a mask when absolutely necessary and they strongly oppose a mask mandate, I can with some confidence predict quite a lot of their other views.
Right.
On a lot of other issues, right? And
sure.
Maybe that should be possible, maybe it shouldn't be possible, but it's just a reality, right? People sort of align along different lines. So if someone's view on one thing, oftentimes you can predict a lot of other stuff. And there's some elements of that are sort of like herd thinking or group think, but some of it is also because it gives you an idea of the person's values and their sort of moral framework and even their personality type, right? And if someone's familiar with personality models, then you know that you can actually quite accurately predict political views just by knowing someone's personality type.
Nope.
Yeah. So all of these things play together, or someone's approach to health and fitness, right? Someone's approach to health and fitness can also give you some predictors, again, not 100% accurate, but it can give you some predictors of their approach to the rest of this thing, right? I mean, I'd imagine that someone who, certainly in my observation, I think that if you go to the gym and you do strength training and you lift weights and you do any type of bodybuilding, you are less likely to be terrified of all this stuff. You are less likely to support massive lockdowns. You are less likely to support mask mandates, etc. If you're someone who doesn't lift, then you're more likely to, right? It's actually like that. It's actually like that. I'm not seeing a lot of buff people who are super pro lockdowns and mask mandates or whatever. And of course there'll be exceptions, but that sort of idea of, personal sovereignty and personal responsibility and working hard for yourself and, looking out for yourself and not expecting the government to take care of you and all these things, they align together for some degree. So for a lot of that, I think, there are people who sort of assume personal responsibility, and there are a lot of people who outsource responsibility.
Yeah.
And if you're someone who's in the latter category, you're much more open to the idea of governmental interference and control, and maybe you even think it's a good thing and a necessary thing. Whereas you're someone who's a lot more like, individual liberty and, personal responsibility and all that. If that's your mantra, then you're more likely to sort of oppose any higher power trying to interfere with that, or to make mandates or put restrictions on your own freedom and liberty and personal choice, so on and so forth. So it tends to line up, whether you're talking guns or you're talking speech or you're talking masks or you're talking like all these things, like people align generally along certain lines, and it's quite fascinating to see. It's also fascinating that it's quite a 50-50 thing. Although, of course, there's like, bunch of people like in the middle. Of course, there's extremes, right?
Right.
But it's quite interesting that overall the split is probably somewhere around 50-50 on that level. So
why do you think that is? I've noticed that as well. I think that it does seem to be pretty 50-50. What are your thoughts on that? Why?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that it's kind of like if you look in any country, most countries, even if you're looking at the sort of like, most countries will have like two big political parties even, right? Mm-hmm. And you typically get somewhere hovering around like 50% of the population on one side and 50% on the other. This time it might go 52-48. That time it might go, 51-49, whatever. Right. But I think, to be honest, I think it depends on what level you look at it. I think on some degree it's because we've just got such a such a diverse range of types of people, in terms of ideology, in terms of ideas, in terms of personality. And even if someone is like just 51% that way, it sort of puts them on that side. And if someone's 49% that way, it sort of puts them on that side, with the same person who might be like, 80 that way or 80 the other way or whatever. Yeah. So I think it naturally finds that there's that median. And of course, anytime you have a median, you're going to have like 50% of people on one side and 50% of people on the other. Even if it's just like, even if most people are, just slightly that way, slightly that way, even politically, like, most people are not far right or far left, sure, right? Politically, most people are somewhere in the middle, maybe a slight right lean, maybe a slight left lean. Some people are more solid. But like generally, it's a bell curve, right? It's a bell curve, and you're always going to have the median in the middle. And, that's the average height. 50% of people are taller, 50% of people are shorter. It's just like, I think it's just a sort of natural phenomenon. And then I think like when it comes to parties or things like that, then they sort of align themselves to, the Democratic Party in the USA aligns themselves to appeal to that 50%. The Republican Party generally aligns itself to, appeal to that 50%. Sometimes you can like reach over and nudge a couple people over, right? Right. And that's how you win. But that's just, I think that's why it is. It's an interesting question. I've never really like thought of it in that much depth, but that would be my somewhat intelligent answer, I think, on the first try.
No, it was great. And I think there's a lot of truth in it. I think when you're talking about people's personalities and people being, either wanting to outsource their rights or take personal responsibility and own their freedom, and value their freedom. I think that's really what it comes down to. It's about values. And, there are the people who they're willing to, sacrifice their safety and, take more risks. And they know that while they're taking that risk, that the price they're paying, but they value the freedom more.
Exactly.
And so therefore they tend to lean that side. That's a personality trait. And then there are other people who are like, I don't really care about freedom as much, and not their primary value.
No. They want to be safe.
Let somebody else dictate what they can and can't do.
Exactly.
and they're sacrificing their freedom for it.
And that creates a natural clash because people who don't want to be bothered don't want people bothering them, right? So there's always people.
That's really
it's like a lot of my political philosophy is leave me alone. Like a lot of it is leave me alone, right? It's not
right.
It's not I want this from you and I want that from you and I demand this and I demand that. It's generally like
just leave me alone.
It's generally like leave me alone. Like that's what most of it boils down to. Don't hurt anyone, don't take anyone's stuff, don't kill anybody, and then beyond that, live your life and try to be successful and give back and help other people and be charitable. But as soon as someone wants to use the government to start like demanding massive things of me or forcing me to behave in a certain way, that most people don't really like that. Most people don't really like that, funnily enough.
That causes a bit of trouble, a little bit of pushback.
Yeah. I mean, this year there hasn't been much pushback, but that's the power of fear, like I was saying.
That's where you can override it, is with fear. Yeah. So I'm curious, you said you've always been kind of more libertarian. Was there a moment for you where that shifted, or has that just been kind of always?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people who have that sort of story of like, I used to be a lefty liberal and then I became like a, conservative or more libertarian. I've always been, I haven't always, I mean, as a child or a teenager, I certainly wasn't particularly political, but if you had polled me, I probably would have been like still like relatively conservative leaning. I think I'm just like right leaning, like by nature.
Right.
Because it makes more sense to me, right? Like it just makes more sense to me, like even, I mean, as a child, like even as a kid, I remember learning about taxes, and I remember in school learning about like progressive tax rates, and I was like, that's not fair. And people were like, a lot of people were like, oh, that's not fair, as in like, they should take more from the rich people. And I'm like, no, that's not fair. Like it should be the same rate for everybody. If you're taking like 60% from that person, right, and then like 10% from that person, I'm like, that's not fair. Like those are different rules for different people, right? So even the meaning of the word fair means different things to different people, right? To me, it's not greedy to want to keep your money, like, but it's greedy to want to take someone else's money. It would be greedy of me to demand that you pay, like that I like take, or like we distribute your wealth. That's greedy. It's not greedy that you or I want to keep what we have worked hard for. That's not me being greedy, right? Or if I'm going to give it away, like I want to be the one who gives it away. Like don't just come and seize it from me and threaten to take it from me and then like go build bombs with it or whatever. Like I don't know what you're going to do. I'd rather like make my own donations and support the causes that I support and whatever. So yeah, and I've always thought that, even though like I never thought deeply about politics when I was younger. But I've always been like that. I've always been very pro like personal responsibility and don't expect handouts, don't be entitled, that's probably some of the way I was raised as well. And yeah, I'll be straight up. Like I just think conservatism makes more sense. Like I think it takes more doublethink to be like, I don't know, on the other side of the aisle. Like there's too much like stuff there that it doesn't, like I can understand it as someone who's an understanding person, but especially in this day and age, less so like, I don't know, if you went back like 15 years ago where things were a bit less like crazy, right? Like now stuff is kind of going crazy, and it's like, people are saying they're pro science whilst they're also saying that, biological men and women are like the same, but they're also different. But like, let's imagine, it just doesn't make sense, like there's too many things there that are just like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. And you
be pro science, but you're telling me that.
Yeah. So Joe Biden today put out a tweet talking about how he's pro science and science will stay at the forefront. He's also wants to make it, okay for biological males to compete with biological females in sport or to enter their prisons, right? As if like these things are just interchangeable, and you're like, that is not scientific, dude.
Social construct. But wait, I thought it was science. Like,
yeah, like
they're like an X chromosome, Y chromosome.
It's madness, They do it with, and it happens with a lot of issues, and I'm just like, that doesn't make sense. Like it's not coherent, right? It's just not coherent to me. So yeah. So
my favorite on like the follow the science argument is that and I'm blanking on his name right now. I need to find it, but there was one of these climate change advocates, and
Okay.
he had been commissioned, in a he was granted a peer review article,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all cheering, and he literally wrote his mother's chocolate cake recipe in this article. And
Oh.
they're all like, yay, like,
Oh, okay.
and he's like, yeah, did you read my article, my peer review article? And they're like, yes, we read it, and they're cheering. And he's like, how was my mom's chocolate cake? Did you like
Yeah.
that recipe? Was it good?
That's so funny. That's so funny.
Right?
But it's the whole appeal to authority thing, right? It's just like, you say the magic word science, and suddenly everything you say is supposed to make sense just because you just said science. And it's like,
and his colleagues did a whole
oh yeah, Peter Boghossian, Helen Pluckers. Yeah. I know all of them.
About those were hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, those were funny.
Following the science. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and any true scientist knows that, there's no such thing as just the science. It's like, there's a scientific method. Science is a way of like investigating and knowing and proving itself wrong. And so when someone just says believe the science, as if it's like it's a very religious statement, it's very like a secular religion, and then it becomes scientism rather than actual science, which is what is happening. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is fascinating. Yeah, and scary, and quite scary, yeah. I think.
Yeah. Like, look after yourself. Look after your loved ones. Like, that's the. You can't save everybody. You can't save everybody. I do my best, but you just can't.
So I'm gonna, for respect for your time, we're gonna wrap this up. But I have two more questions for you.
Okay.
One being, where do you think we are headed? We'll start with that. I guess culturally, geopolitically. Yeah, where do you think we're headed?
That's a good question. Look, for the past several decades, I think it's important to have gratitude and perspective, and we clearly live in by most measures, the safest, most prosperous, and most fair and equal time in history, and some of the most fair, equal, prosperous countries in the entire world. This is factually verifiable. And I think that will generally continue in that trend. However, I have concerns on a moral and spiritual level that we are backsliding. Right? So not in terms of the things that you can necessarily easily measure and just sort of run stats for and compare 1970 to 2020 or compare 2020 to 2030. Some of those things I think are going in the wrong direction culturally. To give a simple example, right? Political polarization is increasing, right? Political hostility is increasing. I would say that, racism and, all these isms, like actual racism, I think had been decreasing my entire lifetime. And I think it's probably had a little spike this year, right? And I think that that's largely due to the so-called anti-racist people. It's like the people who are doing too much, right? Right? So, prior to, throughout my whole life, I'm grateful I'm in the UK where race is less of a thing than it is in the US. Like people in the US, people are weird about the whole race thing. Like it's too much. But really, in the UK, people are just more chilled about it. It's just less of a thing. People don't say
very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the US is obsessed with race. It's too much. People call themselves white Americans and black Americans and Asian Americans. And people in Britain just call themselves British. That's it. I'm not black British. No one says that.
So are you insinuating that perhaps all of this anti-race
yes.
theory that we are teaching in the States is not having quite the effect that on
I generally think that
it's maybe magnifying racism is what you're suggesting.
I generally think that obsessing over people's skin color and sort of categorizing them and even putting them into sort of hierarchies based on them is a bad idea. It's just, I have a hunch. It doesn't matter which way it runs. I think it's a bad idea. I just don't think we should do that. I don't think, telling people they're privileged or oppressed simply because of dint of their
it's insulting.
Ancestry is a good idea.
Wrong, and I think it's insulting and it's damaging, and I think
I agree.
And I think it propagates exactly the narrative that they're trying to argue against.
It does. Absolutely. It does. And I think it's intentional. Like, I don't think these people have good intentions. Like, I simply don't. A lot of the the people at the top of it anyway, the people who are making a killing, you can become a millionaire off being an anti-racist by, so I don't think those people, I think those people want if racism actually completely goes away, then so do their jobs. So they have to, they have to create that's why they keep changing the definitions too, right? Like, I've never heard in any year in my life, I've never heard more people talking about white supremacy. And I'm a bit like, what are you even talking about? Like, white supremacy used to mean like, the KKK, neo-Nazis, like we are the superior race. We want to exterminate or exile or whatever, like anyone who is not, like, that's what white supremacy used to mean. Right. Now people just throw it around like ketchup. And they just say white supremacy, right? White supremacy. I'm like, what are you even talking about? Like, what white supremacy? I don't live in a flipping there are no white supremacists. There's like 10 of them. And they're like, no one cares who they are. They have no influence. There used to be white supremacists in flipping Congress, right? There used to be white supremacist governors in America. There used to be like actual, segregation and, mistreating people. Like, those were all real things. The KKK was a real thing. It had millions of members. Black people were not safe. So when people talk about like white supremacy in I'm like, what are you even talking about? Like, that's pretty much dead. Like, and anyone who really holds those beliefs is not taking seriously and is absolutely not led near.
Does not have a voice. I mean,
no. So with stuff like that, it's like, they just keep shifting the goalposts and changing definitions and doing. I'm just like, look, I think we all just need to stop paying attention to stupid people. I think. In this age of social media, everyone has a platform, which is beautiful, but it's also terrible. And I think that too many people are taking people with stupid ideas seriously, right? Whether this idea is that, like, I can just tomorrow say that I'm a woman and I'm magically a woman and I've always been one. That's a stupid idea. It makes no sense.
So
it's not scientific.
Thing is that I really identify as a billionaire. And so, when I rob a bank, it's okay because, I just need to make my bank account match up with my identity. Yeah. So you really can't fault me for that. Yeah.
And then you can identify as innocent.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think this is, I'm going to go with this. That's my identity. So.
Yeah. Like, there's just ideas that, are just so laughably absurd, but we've decided that, every single idea has to be like.
I kind of like unicorns too. I might identify with them too.
What's that?
Even though I said I kind of like unicorns too, I might identify with them. Even though they don't exist, that's just a minor detail.
Oh, that's okay. That's being two-spirit, right? That's what it's called, unicornkin. And I don't know. I think people need some. You'd think with this pandemic, people would have some like real problems or something, but apparently not. I think the modern West is still too comfortable, but like, I don't know.
That is actually a really good point, because I think part of the reason we are in that you brought up this it's factually statistically provable that we are as a world, not just individual nations, but even third world nations, we are more prosperous. We are in much better living conditions than in previous years and previous generations. Yeah. And yet it is because we are so luxurious that we are complaining about things that are literally absurd. And that
we're making up problems.
This victimhood because they don't have real problems to contend with. And that's not to say that real problems don't exist. And that's not to say that there aren't lots of room for improvement. Mm-hmm. But the fact that we're griping about some of the things that we're griping about is just testimony to how privileged we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, if you have any things you'd like to close with, and certainly tell people all the wonderful places they can find you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm on all social media at Zuby Music. That is ZUBY Music. You can check out my podcast, Real Talk with Zuby, as well as my music on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, wherever you listen. Just search for my name, Zuby, ZUBY, and you can get started there.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And if you're open to it, I'd love to do another, like a part 2 and talk about just your book. Cool. If you're down for that. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you.
You're very welcome.